I am very sorry I can't be there, but as you just heard, my chief scientist, my VP of research, Caitlin Lewis, is present. I don't know whether Caitlin has already presented or whether she's presenting tomorrow. I hope it's tomorrow because I'm going to give a rather introductory talk. But I want to start, first of all, by thanking the whole DeSci community, not just for having me speak at this conference, but also for the enormous amount of support that we've received from VitaDAO, from Bioprotocol, and so on, in getting this far with the projects that we're doing. You'll probably hear from Caitlin that there is a very impressive AI agent named Aubrey, A-U-B-R-A-I, which has fantastic graphics as well, courtesy of VitaDAO's graphic designer Hike, who is actually also working on a new version of our website right now. So, we're extremely grateful for all of that. But because Caitlin is present in person, I thought it would be best for me to focus on the background of our collaborations with the DeSci community and the projects that we are focused on at LEV Foundation. And I've only got 20 minutes, so I'll see what I can do. I haven't used StreamYard for quite a long time, so I'm just making sure I can stay my slides. There we go. All right, so I always start with this. I always say, we have to focus on why aging is so resistant to the attempts that the medical profession has made to bring it under control and to keep people healthy later in life. It's quite paradoxical that the progress against age-related conditions has been so much less impressive than the progress we've made against the infectious diseases that used to kill so many of us a couple of centuries ago. And most people think it's just because there's so much complexity in aging. Don't worry, you're not supposed to be able to read this slide. That so many things go wrong during late life, and that maybe it's just it's overwhelmed us. And of course, AI is a potential hope there, because it allows us to manage and to grapple with very complex data sets to a much greater extent than we used to be able to. However, the bad news is that this is actually not the main reason why aging is still such a problem for medicine. The main problem is that people just don't think about aging correctly. People think that there is some kind of separation between the chronic progressive diseases of aging, that's column 3 in this little table, versus this thing called aging itself, which is column 4. And that's wrong. The real problem with this interpretation is that it makes people think that we might be able to use the same kind of medicines against the things in column 3 that have worked so well against the things in column 1, infectious diseases. But because of what aging is, that's not the case. So what is aging? Well, first of all, we have to take into account that aging is not one process. It's really a combination of 2 processes. One that goes on throughout life, even starting before we're born, and another one that only happens late in life. And this is a very, very simple idea. It just says the normal operation of the human body, that's what metabolism means, causes damage. It causes changes to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of the body. And those changes, eventually exceed what the body is built to tolerate. And that's when the right-hand process kicks off. So there's feedback, of course, between these things. The more damage you have, the less good the body becomes at stopping more damage from happening. And once you start getting sick, the pathologies of late life, then that feedback becomes a lot stronger. So that's why aging speeds up as it progresses. But what this tells us immediately is that aging is that the ways to get sick should be viewed in this way. In other words, that aging is not something separate from the diseases of aging. Rather, that there are simply a lot of aspects of aging, and we have chosen, for whatever reason, to give disease-like names to some of those things and not to others. That's the only difference. The difference between column 3 and column 4 is purely semantic, which is helpful because it helps us to understand why this kind of approach to addressing aging with medicine is hopeless. What does addressing aging with medicine mean in the context of this definition? Well, of course, what it means is separating metabolism from pathology. It means allowing people to carry on being alive, in other words, performing metabolism, without getting sick. And geriatric medicine is all about essentially ignoring the left-hand process completely and just trying to manage the pathologies directly in the face of this accumulating damage that is causing those pathologies. It's just like, it's completely brain dead. There's no way it could ever work. Now, about a century ago or more, a few people started to realize that, and that's where the whole field of gerontology came from. People said, well, we're not going to be able to do that, therefore we should try to be more preventative and essentially make the body run more cleanly. We can somehow, manipulate our metabolism so that it creates less damage than it normally would. And that will, of course, delay the point at which the damage accumulates to a pathogenic level. It's a good idea in principle, but it's not really a very productive one because of this. Metabolism is just ridiculously complicated. And furthermore, the creation of damage is intrinsic. It's just too, inextricably intertwined with the things that we need our metabolism to do to keep us alive from one day to the next. And the result is that, we've made no progress here either in postponing aging by making the body run more cleanly. So 25 years ago, I came along and I said, hang on, there's a third possibility here. We can separate metabolism from pathology without interfering in either of the two processes, the process that creates damage and the process that damage creates. And the way we do it is by removing the damage, by doing preventative maintenance. We don't have to even remove the damage particularly thoroughly. Just as long as we remove a lot of it, we will be able to stop the damage from reaching the level that makes us sick, even though damage is still being created at the natural rate. And this is enormously helpful because it sidesteps all of our ignorance about how metabolism works and about how it creates damage, and it relieves us of the need to do this impossible thing of making metabolism not do the thing we don't want it to do, the creation of damage, while letting metabolism carry on doing the things we need it to do to keep us alive. So, this is basically just the same thing as we do for simple man-made machines. This is a car that's more than 100 years old, and it's working every bit as well as it did the day it was built. The definition I've just given you of aging could be used absolutely without any alteration to describe aging of a simple man-made machine. So, it's really common sense. So then what I did was, a long time ago, I said, well, okay, in order to do this maintenance, we have to describe what the damage is. What are the actual differences in structure and composition between an older person and a young adult that are eventually bad for us and cause us to get sick? And the good news was that even back in the year 2000, it was possible to make such a classification and to be fairly confident that it was complete, because I was able to identify categories, all of which had been, substantial topics of research interest in gerontology for 18 years or more. The most recent was 1982. And the good news is that that's still true. We still have no new types of damage. The classification on the left-hand side of this table is standing the test of time. Now, the purpose of this classification is to describe what we need to do. So on the right, we have the approaches to doing the preventative maintenance that I have suggested, and I did suggest 25 years ago, and they are still being pursued, and indeed have progressed far enough that we have now got, startup companies working in these areas. And of course, they're mentioning again that the DeSci community is getting very involved in all of this, because there's plenty to do, especially in a divide and conquer strategy that is involved in all of this. So it's definitely very ripe for the involvement of the DeSci community, and I'm so delighted that Vita Down, Bioprotocol, and so on have become so involved. So thank you again to all of them. I should just say that even though this idea was a huge paradigm shift when I first introduced it, it has very much become a mainstream way of thinking now. About a decade later, a group of my colleagues put together a paper that has become absolutely the Bible of gerontology. It's been cited far more often than any other paper in the whole of the biology of aging this century, and it's essentially a restatement of the same idea. So that's quite good news. So what are we doing? Well, I have run and led a succession of non-profit foundations in the USA over the past 20-odd years. And the previous ones, the first and second ones, we were focused on developing the components of this divide and conquer approach. In particular, we were focused on the most difficult components, the ones that were being neglected by the research community because they were just too hard, and one was unable to get the frequency of nicely highly cited papers that one needs in order to get promoted or to get one's next grant application funded. If you're being funded entirely by philanthropy, which is the way I have operated, then it's easier to do hard things. But now in this, in LEV Foundation, my current organization, what we are doing is we are putting together some of the easier types of damage repair, of maintenance that have been developed. And the reason we're doing this is because we can, because some of those approaches have now got far enough along that they actually work in mice, to the extent of actually extending mouse lifespan by a significant amount. So we took a bunch of those things, starting about 3.5 years ago, and we put them together in the same mice at the same time. We are doing damage repair here, so it doesn't make sense to start early in life. We want to treat middle-aged mice that have already accumulated a certain amount of damage, and we want to make them live longer. And the idea is that if we take things that individually give a certain amount of life extension, then putting many of them together in the same mice at the same time should, in principle, have an additive effect. The fact that just one intervention can actually increase mouse lifespan at all is, on its face, quite surprising, because, as I've just explained to you, there are lots of different types of damage that accumulate throughout life. But the reason that happens is because the processes of damage accumulation do have a certain amount of crosstalk between each other. And furthermore, there's that feedback that I mentioned earlier on, that the more damage you have, the faster subsequent damage is created. Therefore, if you can remove even one type of damage, you're kind of relieving the pressure on the body and allowing the body to be better at slowing down the accumulation of other types of damage. So it's not so surprising, but we should still see this additive effect. And so we're starting when the mice are in middle age. That means about 1.5 years old, because they normally live about 2.5 years. And our stretch goal was to give them an additional 12 months of life. The world record, the best you can actually do right now, when you take mice that are already 1.5 years old, is only 4 months of extra life. That's been possible for decades, for half a century. You can do it just by not feeding them as much as they would like. It's called calorie restriction, and it works very nicely. It doesn't work nearly so well in long-lived species, however, such as human beings. So it's definitely not something that's worth pursuing as a holy grail of bringing aging under really comprehensive control and extending healthy and total lifespan by a large amount. So, well, the short answer is that we achieved one of our goals, but not the other in this study, which ended about a year ago. We did see additivity. What I'm showing you here is what are called Kaplan-Meier curves, survival curves. So on the x-axis is the age of the mice, starting at 19 months of age. And on the y-axis is the proportion of mice that were still alive at any given age. So, of course, the graphs go down as you go to the right, and eventually all the mice are dead. And so I want to draw your attention, first of all, to the thick lines. You can see that there's a thick blue line and a thick red line. The blue line is simply the mice that were not getting any of the treatments, the controls. And the red line is the ones that were getting all 4 of our treatments. And as you can see, they lived a lot longer, but not a year longer, only about 4 months longer. Now, so that means that we did not achieve our goal of a 12-month increase in lifespan. However, the good news is that we did show this additive effect. The other lines, the thin lines in the middle, are the treatment groups that received some, but not all, of the interventions. And the key point is they're in the middle. In other words, the ones that got all the interventions did the best. So we have achieved proof of concept, proof of principle, that this approach works. This is in female mice. Situation in male mice was a bit more complicated. As you can see, the thick blue line is somewhere in the middle because some of the treatment groups did really badly, and we don't really know why that is, but the general principle is, again, the same. The mice that got all 4 of the treatments did the best. So that's fine. I should highlight that we did a lot of testing of the health of the mice as well. This is kind of superfluous in a way, because we know that the only way to make either mice or humans live longer is to keep them healthy for longer. So we know perfectly well that they're going to be healthier. But nevertheless, we did measure the health of the mice in many different ways, so, and as is always done in mouse longevity experiments. But I really want to talk about what we want to do next. And as StreamYard tends to do, it has messed up the formatting of my my slide. I'm rather frustrated about that. But you can see that here we have a list of a number of interventions that have not been used in our previous experiment and that we want to put together in a future study. The idea here is that the more things we put in, the better our chances of getting not just an additive effect, but a big additive effect, maybe even getting to our 12-month stretch goal. So most of the interventions that you can see listed on this rather messed up slide are ones that are already shown, as before, to extend life in mice on their own, individually. And we could not have done this experiment 3.5 years ago because most of those studies that have shown that these things actually extend mouse lifespan had not been done then. They were done during the course of our first study. So that's really good news if you think about it, that there's this steady stream of new ways to delay aging in mice, and it gives us much more options. And from a decentralized science perspective, this is quite important because it means that there are plenty of opportunities for people to get involved in this. Of course, the ideal way from our point of view is to fund LEV Foundation to do this huge study that we want to do next, which will be 2,000 mice. That's twice as big as the first study. But, you know, of course, there's always the option to do your own experiments. It's fairly easy to get access to a mouse facility that knows how to do mouse lifespan experiments. So, you know, the more we have in terms of ways to extend mouse lifespan, the better. And we are very much working towards putting at least 8 of these treatments together in our next study. Caitlin has been leading the design of this study, and so she can talk about it in more detail. but the essence of it is that we have now a wide variety of different things to put together. We are currently, courtesy of VitaDAO, doing some pilot studies to optimize the main study. The pilot studies involve obviously very few mice, so they're considerably less expensive. But we are working out a bunch of kinks so that the final study can go as well as possible. We are, as I say, doing these pilot studies. We are being fairly careful about the design of the new study in terms of minimizing the amount of money that we need at the beginning of the experiment, because the first experiment was very front-loaded. We had to get all of the money in at the beginning, and we've found ways to stagger that a little bit. But the main thing I want to draw your attention to here is the bottom line, the smart cages. There's a fantastic company in the US named Olden Labs, which has developed these extraordinary things that fit on as the lids of the cages that mice live in, and that do 24-hour monitoring, both audio and video, of the mice in the cage, so as to obtain very large amounts of data on the activity of the mice, on how healthy they are, how they're moving around, what they are eating and drinking, and so on. And this data will save us a fair amount of money because it reduces the amount of technician time that is needed to monitor the health of the mice. But of course, it also gets a great deal more data than could in practice be obtained with only humans monitoring it. So this is a great advance. We are by no means the only people using these cages. They've become very popular. And of course, the data we're going to be able to make available so that people in the DeSci community can analyze it in real time while the experiment is ongoing. I'm going to close down there because I'm out of time, and thank you again for sticking around for this last talk of the day. I want to thank, obviously, our donors, including VitaDAO. Caitlin and I wrote a paper recently talking about the motivation for these studies in more detail than what I've been able to describe today. There's a QR code there for anyone who feels motivated to support this financially, or, of course, to find out more about what we do at our website, which, as I say, is in the process of a revamp, but there's plenty of information there already. So thank you again.